Welcome to The Teacher's Story, a podcast dedicated to amplifying the voices of educators and advocates in the field of education. Here, we celebrate those who champion our children's potential and seek innovative approaches to nurture their brilliance. Join us as we share candid stories, explore impactful ideas, and showcase effective educational programs. This podcast stands for transparency, authenticity, and innovation, driven by the belief that we can revolutionize the education system to ensure every individual thrives. Together, let's redefine education as a pathway to human flourishing. Hi, welcome to The Teacher's Story. I'm Jackie Scully, and today we have Krista Beehler with us. And I met Krista through a mutual connection and actually through Instagram, the beauty of social media. I'm really excited to have Krista here today because she's going to tell us all about her company, Kind Spirit Kids, and really looking at holistic education and having big conversations with kids in a very safe space. So definitely in my wheelhouse to have this conversation too. Welcome to The Teacher's Story. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me, Jackie.
My first question for you is tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, what got you interested in education from the beginning.
So it's kind of funny. When I was growing up, I always had this feeling like I was going to be working with kids even while I was a kid. And I remember doing this early project in like grade 5 or something where you had to like pick a career that you might want to do when you grow up. And I remember thinking like, I don't know if teacher's it. I know I want to help kids. I guess teaching can help kids. I could pick that, or I could pick like a youth counselor. And I remember I went with youth counselor at the time because there was like this helping component that just felt really innate inside my body. And so from the very beginning, it was like always going to be working with children in some capacity. So I knew that was going to happen for me. And then when I first started in the education system, it was like, okay, yes, working with kids, this is where I'm meant to be for sure. And I worked with really young ages. And then it was like, no, wait, this isn't quite it. There's something else I'm supposed to be doing. So that led me to KSK.
That's really awesome that you had that kind of intuition early on. I've been in this profession for 20 years, and I feel like I just kind of came around to we could do this differently in like the last 2 years, maybe because I've just been in the system for so long. And I like that you picked up on something early on and you're like, this is just not the way I want to be, like working with kids or in education. So can you tell us a little bit about that intuitive hit and kind of the pivoting of I'm not going to do education the traditional route, but then I want to create my own program?
Yeah. So initially it was like I just wasn't seeing every children thrive throughout the day in school. Like it was like some children were really great in one program or some children were really great in another subject. And I just didn't see tools that were helping children navigate all of it throughout their day. And with the world's mental health issues just like rising more and more and hearing more and more about mental health, it was like, well, wait a minute, wouldn't education be more successful if everybody had access to tools that made them feel mentally well? And that if that wasn't a big component or at the backbone of education, then we were lacking in some way. And we were doing a disservice to the next generation of people who were going to be coming out of education and into our communities to serve in some way. And so I just felt like we needed more. I felt like, there was sprinkling of affirmations, or there were programs where you might discuss things like empathy, but we weren't teaching children the wide array of tools that are available to just really be in touch with themselves and have that sort of awareness of self and understanding. And I think emotional wellness just brings together just such a sense of confidence that education can then be successful. And I think with the extrinsically motivated models of the traditional education system, children are also not encouraged on any given day to tap into self in that way.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's where you find, you're always in some subject having children who are unmotivated because in a math class, you might have an athlete. In a English class, you might have a science person or, someone who will grow up to be in chemistry. And I think that's where we're lacking, is just kind of dragging everybody through this this mold of this is what you should know, when I really think the focus needs to be steered to celebrating learning. And
Mm.
we're primal beings, primed to learn. We've gotten ourselves so far off of those instincts, so it's interesting that then we enter a system where it's like, okay, tell me what to do, tell me what to learn, as opposed to what's inside here. What are you fired up by? What are your passions? What do you want to learn? Which will in turn just bring all that motivation and interest to the subject.
Yeah. And I like how you said like this primal part of who we are. Like we grow up as little kids in most environments as being able to explore, being able to like tap into who we are. And then we're like immediately put into like a box right when we enter the school system. And I would say even some pre-K, maybe even kindergarten is still very exploratory, play based. And then it's like immediately right into like the grade levels. It gets into the strict lessons, more subject, content oriented, testing, all of that. And it completely does a 180 with the natural sense of learning and how we are exploring ourselves, exploring others, our environment, and all of that. And you're absolutely right. Like, we always are seeing this like mental health crisis, but then we're not really addressing it in the schools. If anything, we put band-aids. So let's create a program. Let's cram in a lesson or two into the schedule that's already very, over scheduled. And kids are already just like, I'm done. I'm over scheduled and I'm stressed out. I don't really want to pay attention to a social emotional learning lesson I get maybe once a week in like an advisory program, if they even have that. So I think your kind of take on the system and what's happening is really important. And I love that you're offering something that can go along with kids who are probably going to school in a regular system, or maybe they're homeschool or in other alternative methods. So can you tell us a little bit about like maybe the day-to-day type of programming you do or the types of kids you work with and maybe their educational experiences and how they come to you and how you've seen them kind of grow and thrive in your program?
Yeah, sure. So first and foremost, KSK, or Kind Spirit Kids, is a program for the children. It's a place for children to be able to show up exactly as they are and not have to perform by any standard. So a big thing in my program is like, I'm never going to tell a child to sit still and listen. That's just not going to happen. I also am always prepared at the start of a class to just toss the material out the door and meet them with whatever they're coming to me with that day. And that's kind of the really fun thing about Kind Spirit Kids, is there's so much flexibility because it's a program for children, right? So the pillars of Kind Spirit Kids, we have movement, creative expression, space for self, connection, breath work. And all of these things are just the pillars of things that we explore. So there's a plethora of movement experiences we offer children to try on. There's a plethora of creative expression activities they try on. And barely just under these 5 pillars, children are then exposed to a wider range of things. And some of them are going to land and some of them aren't. But that's their own journey of finding what works for them to process their emotions. So the Kind Spirit Kids class is either in class in my home, which typically tends to the homeschool community as it is during the week, during the day. But I also do virtual classes that is accessible to anybody, anywhere. And the difference between those two programs is the in class is a longer day, it's more involved, and there's a big availability for free time. We always have outdoor play where it's just child led. I'm nothing but a guide, engaging in their things that they're like leading. And then the virtual space, which is really awesome. And this only started with the onset of the pandemic. I had moved away from where I was teaching in Toronto, and I wanted to be able to access my students still, and they were wanting to come to Kind Spirit Kids still. So I figured out a way to make an intimate program virtual, which took a little bit of finesse, but it ended up kind of birthing this whole other version of Kind Spirit Kids, which is really exciting because I kept the class sizes for virtual very intimate. It's 5 students in a class. And what that provides is ample space for children to be seen and heard and share and express themselves. It's a lot more conversation based. And every child is showing up from a safe place. They're usually
Mm.
coming in their bedroom where they feel comfortable and they're not just right face to face with somebody. So you get like a lot of openness and vulnerability happening in that space. And what I'm finding is these classes are so small that they can also just grow with each other. I've been
Mm.
teaching virtual now for a few years, and the same kids are in the same program. And so they're just kind of growing up with this like circle of
Mm.
connection for each other, which is like so beautiful to see. And it really just ended up being kind of this really unique experience for Kind Spirit kids and just different than the in class. And then I also offer on site Kind Spirit Kids. So that's where I'm going into like the public school system and hosting a
Mm.
Kind Spirit Kids class to show educators and children what else is possible and a different type of way to learn and tap into self. I'm also eager to get into just doing workshops with teachers and trying to kind of turn the lens a little bit to what really matters and having them show up with their vulnerability as well and meet children kind of
Mm.
more on like a human equal playing field as opposed to being like leader and follower dynamics, which I think is something I'm really excited to be like pursuing right now. So I'm doing work with consulting with educators and parents as well to bring emotional wellness into homes or schools. So there's kind of a lot of a lot of
Yeah.
ways that Kind Spirit Kids is trickling out, but it's really exciting.
Yeah, and I think it's important to have the different modalities because you can reach as many people as possible. And I like this idea of keeping the virtual from the pandemic. I think there's some things we definitely are like, we want to toss out the window from the pandemic, but there's a lot we could take with us because you can reach now people, essentially all over the world. And I like this idea of you're not taking the same program in person and trying to mimic it on, Zoom calls. It's like probably not going to be the same. They probably do more of their movement as maybe their own exercises, but that it becomes more of this small knit conversational type of like cohort and they can build relationships with one another. I could see that very much growing into when they are becoming teens, right? And maybe you're having more of those
Yes.
like intimate, maybe kind of sticky kind of conversations that could be hard to have in school or even to have with parents at home, but they have this very close group of, other teens alongside them, along with you as a guide to mentor and be there. So I know we talked before, like it's interesting to see how your kids grow up in your program and become teens and young adults and how that may kind of change also your programming, but also maybe you'll have some guides that will join you along the way. So I wonder like if there's any other things you see kind of like sprouting or where you see it going in the future.
Yes, this is one of my favorite things that has just sort of naturally evolved through the Kind Spirit Kids program. And like you're saying, as kids are growing up through the program. And that's that they are becoming teachers themselves. They're becoming the guides. It's so common now for my students who've been with me for a few years to just show up and be like, I've planned a guided meditation today, or I've planned a creative expression craft today or something like that. And I'm just like, perfect. I just scrap what I had planned and like, let's go. Let's see what you have. And they get so empowered and excited to
Mm,
be leader in that way.
yeah.
So that's been really fun. My daughter, she's 9. She's also gone to do on-site visits with me, at Girl Guides or public schools, and is also a part of teaching that program. And I think that shows children what's possible,
Mm,
that leaders don't need to be adults. And I think that's a really big
exactly.
message to send, right? That
Yes.
agency and that sovereignty to bring what they have to offer. And who's going to relate better to children than children?
Yeah.
They get it. So that's been a really fun part that, I didn't really planned to happen, but just has been happening. And I think that came with sort of the openness I brought to the program of where are you guys at today and what do you guys want to explore and
Hmm.
just
Hmm.
maintaining that like openness relationship.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's been really fun.
I think being in flow and being organic and open is actually when things really blossom and they start to
Mhm.
ripple out and grow, like your whole company is growing. And I love the idea of going into schools because to extend your services not only to the school, but then to train teachers. And hopefully there is an openness to explore this in the classroom where, I know teachers only have so much control over the schedule and over their day to day. And maybe there's more of an opening in certain, maybe like lower school, elementary school, or maybe in certain programs. So, another question that was just kind of like on my mind is, how have you been able to build those relationships with the schools and teachers? And do you see a willingness and this open to see that they will bring this into their classroom?
Yeah, so I feel like it starts with just continuing to like network and things like that. A parent of a kind spirit kid student just happened to also work in a school system and was
Mm.
like, "Hey, your program would be a really great addition. We're looking for bringing, more mindfulness into our school." And I think that's something that schools are seeking out right now. And I think there's a lot of great programs out there, but I think there's just this like gap that's missing in what's offered. And I think that's where the teachers have a lot to bring to a mindfulness program. Like they really need to show up in truth and in vulnerability themselves, like connecting with a classroom could be as easy as walking into your room in the morning and saying, "You know what, guys, I've had a bad morning," and just letting them know what's been going on for you and being like, "I'm going to shake it off right now for everybody here, but if I'm a little off, this is why." And that's just so
Yeah.
human to like relate to on that level, you know what I mean? And so much of the program I'm bringing into these places is more about that. It's not that we need children to tap into mindfulness because they innately will and
Mm.
do. They're so good at being present. The real training or the real work, and I think what has been so well received is really just talking about parents or teachers showing up for themselves, making sure they're taking care of themselves on a daily basis, making sure they have that cup to pour from in the beginning,
Mhm.
making sure that if they're asking their children or classrooms to be empathetic or mindful, that they're modeling that all of the
True.
time. And that's
Yeah.
so important because who's going to listen to a teacher who's not practicing it themselves, right? That's the greatest impact we have on the younger generation, is to show them what works for us and to model
Yeah.
that. So it's really important, and it's been really well received. I've kind of blown some minds along the way. I've
Mm.
had, educators or leaders or teachers in different programs be like, "I've never seen my class act this way or participate or be as interested in what we're doing." And I think there's the caveat of like, okay, I'm new, so they might be listening to me more because I'm not a familiar face. But there's also just the part of connecting in a way of, I'm going to bring you vulnerability, and that invites a comfort for you to bring vulnerability back. And that exchange alone
Mm.
just adds so much richness to some time together. So I
Yeah.
really think that's, if I could do an entire TED talk on
Mhm.
something, it would be modeling. It's the
Yeah.
importance of modeling. It's modeling what you want to see. If you want to see a mindful, in touch with self, children who are, can express their feelings and articulate and communicate through any adversity, then you need to show it, and that's where it starts.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it is a mindset shift in schools because we've done school a certain way for so long. And I think it's been a system of top down, a lot of like roles, right?
Yeah.
Teacher is instructing student, student is listening to teacher. Teacher has to have full control of the classroom and has to manage that when really it should be a shared space. And I think if like an adult comes in there and creates it as a shared space and as like, I'm part of this ecosystem with you, I'm part of this lesson that we're going to do today with you. And so I think being transparent is really key. I've been trying to work on that more too. Like, we're not robots. And if I'm having a bad morning or there's like a ton on my plate from just a hectic school schedule, like I'll often just share that with students and I'm very transparent with them. And then it allows them to kind of like share and open up too.
Yes.
And they feel like, oh, it's not just me, or like I don't have to be
Yes.
so on and perfect right now because my teacher is all the time and they expect that
Yeah.
from me. It's like, no, like, you know what? This is a week, everyone. Like they have like packed a lot in our schedule and we have a lot going on. It's really stressful. Let's just like take a breather. Like when the bell rings, I never start right away. Cause I'm like, I hate that whole bell to bell thing. You need to be in performance productive mode. Like if someone
Right.
observes my class, it's like, I'm not like hook on the board, do this, bell rang, let's go. Like I need to like have them settle in. And I'll often say like, okay, like the bell rang, like give me a couple minutes, taking attendance, just kind of settle in. And I often say like,
Yeah.
let's just settle in and give some breathing room. And I teach teenagers, so they're like usually all hype and off the wall anyway.
Yeah.
So, they need a little like settling in too. And there's also nothing wrong with some high energy and just being like, they're happy to be around each other and just to
Yeah.
socialize. And it's just like let them kind of have that little moment in transition
Yeah.
between classes. So I think the conversations with teachers and administrators, because administrators are the ones that are really kind of setting the tone for this whole school and the schedule, um, about what it means to be mindful themselves so that they could set the tone for
Yes.
the children. And you say you work with parents too. Have you been able to kind of like workshop with parents to kind of maybe set this kind of tone in their home as well?
Yes, definitely. So, what I love to do is when I'm consulting with parents, I go over the 5 pillars and we find out what those 5 things are for their own child in a unique way. So, that has to work, alongside me. And that's the parent tapping into who their child is and what they see them enjoy doing, their interests, how they thrive, how they learn. And then it's picking their special things for them and then knowing when to use those tools and model those tools as well. So I also talk about a lot of modeling when I'm talking with parents, and then just like figuring out what works for each individual. Parents of older kids, it's like have a family meeting, put everything out on one piece of paper and put a poster up in your home. If um if going for a walk works for your mom, but taking a nap works for another, like let's know that about each other. You know what I mean? And let's figure that out, not in the moment when we need it and we are, our minds are maybe elsewhere, but just knowing it about each other in the time when everyone's
Mm,
good and then having those tools moving forward. And I think a key component when I'm working on this with families or even educators is everybody is so unique and there needs to be a celebration of that uniqueness.
mhm.
Like yoga works for some people, but it doesn't work for everybody. And that's totally fine. There's unique tools in each one of these pillars that can be accessible to anybody. And so
Mhm.
it's more about just finding those unique things to every individual and then running with that and using it when you need it.
Yeah, and I feel like when you experiment with these tools when you're younger, you're more equipped when you become a teen and young adult in stressful times to use those tools. Like,
Yes.
I wish I had that when I was in high school and
Same.
college. I had so much anxiety
Right?
and so stressed out. I was that student that would stay home from school because I was like nervous or stressed out about something and I had like the stomach ache. And I'm like, I didn't have these tools in my tool belt. So I think starting young and then kids knowing like this is what works for me when I'm stressed out, or
Hmm.
this is what helps me regulate my emotions and like where I'm at. And then they carry that into young adulthood. And then you just have more regulated adults. And when you have more regulated adults,
Exactly.
you have better relationships. You
And
have a
stronger
better workplace,
communities.
stronger communities because
Yes.
it funnels into everything. So,
Yes.
like, I always say education is the foundation of everything because that's how you are molding these kids to be young adults, and they're going to carry that with them into their relationships, into the workplace, into their communities, maybe taking on leadership roles. And you want regulated adults. We see a very dysregulated world, right? Like you just turn on the news and they're like,
Yes.
there you go. There's dysregulation all over the place. So it's important to prioritize it. It's not just these like soft skills people talk about or
Yes.
the additional things we could have, but it really should be like the like foundation of like everything that we do. And I'm just coming into this work, into my late 30s, into early 40s. And I'd love to see this in schools. I wrote about this a little bit in my book at the end of the book of doing some of this mindfulness work and actually creating the structure of the school day. So like in a traditional school that you go to, we need to actually recreate the schedule a little bit because the schedule doesn't fit any time in for this
Yeah.
type of work. And like you can do it again here and there, but I think we are cramming in way too much in a day. Like most
Yes.
kids are taking 6 to 8 classes in what, a 6 or 7 hour window of time. That is
Yeah.
a lot. Like, what is actually happening to their brain? Like, they're not going to retain all that. They can't
Yeah,
perform,
and
you
it's
know?
communicating that they need to know everything and get it
Yeah.
all in, and it's this
Yeah.
communication of, like, fit it in there. Like, if you don't know all of this, you will be lacking, which is
Right.
insane to me because
Yeah.
we've shifted so far away from just the idea of celebrating learning. And like I mentioned
Yeah.
before, that primal instinct to want to learn. We're
Yeah.
intrinsically wired to want to
Yeah.
learn, to
Yeah.
follow our passions and interests and want to figure out things about the world. And so when you are shoving it all in that way, you're really
Mm,
missing out on the opportunity of where would these kids go if they were the seekers, if they
mm.
had agency over what they wanted to learn, if they were fueled by passion, how fast would a project get done? You know
Yes.
what I mean? And you're
Yeah.
missing out on all of that when you're cramming it in. And
Yeah.
it really is kind of one of those things where you have to ask yourself, what are we getting it all in? And do we really feel like at the end of high school, there are no gaps in education?
Mm.
You
Mhm.
know, and there's,
Yeah.
it's just like sidestepping the fact that, like, if we instead were to operate as guides as opposed to teachers, and there wasn't a set amount of things we needed to get in children and have everybody know the same things, but instead rearing children who are just great at learning and are very efficient at that and know how to manage their time and, you know,
Mhm.
explore an
Mhm.
array of texts and using online things. And, you know, like,
Mhm. Mhm.
if we celebrated learning for learning's sake,
Yeah.
then everybody who ever needed to know something would just then learn that.
Yeah.
And you would be
Exactly.
following those stages. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? So it's
Yeah.
like, it's so hard to watch children go through burnout in the school
Mhm.
system, and then it becomes this thing where it's like, I don't want to learn because, like, I'm
I
finally
know.
home from learning, and that's not the way it should be. You know what I mean? Like,
No.
you should want to get home and keep working on the thing you want to work on because it's
Yeah.
your passion and you're
Exciting. Yeah.
excited about it and you want to learn more about that and master that craft. And
Yeah.
I mean, we're really doing a disservice, and I think to our
Mhm.
communities as well, because who would be leaving high school and how would they be leaving high school and going into their careers or their next stage in education if it were that way? Like, who
Yeah.
knows?
Yeah, and the workplace and the way we do show up in the working world is changing. I mean, AI is inevitably like part of our workplace. Like it's going to take over a lot of the mundane tasks. It already is. And we're going to be the ones that need to be more so the regulators and creating and all of that. So like we're not opening up a school system for facilitating, for creativity, for problem solving and collaboration, which that's really what we have now in like a workplace. And many
Yes.
more people are entrepreneurs. Many more people like yourself are starting their own businesses or organizations because they want to create something new. And we don't really allow for space for students to kind of like, well, if you could create your own business or organization, like what would that look like? Like there's other countries that do that. I know some high schools in Germany do that. A lot of the like Nordic countries, especially Finland's always like in the, conversation of like they do school really well. They think outside the
Hmm.
box. You're in Canada, I'm in the United States. I feel like we're kind of like seeing the similar type of pattern of the
Yeah.
traditional school system. But we do need to like make space for that and give students those options. And I like the idea of teachers not being a teacher, but a guide. For the longest time, I was just thinking, I'm not someone who wants to be an expert in a subject. I don't consider myself an expert by any means. Sure, I studied the social sciences a long time ago, and I've taught for, 2 decades, but I'm not an expert. I mean, I can't go on and know everything that Google has to offer, you know what I
Right.
mean? Or every
Yeah.
database.
Yes.
So I always would come to the class of like, I'm going to give you these lessons and we're going to hit on these topics that I have found that are, important, but like let's explore within this, history class and this curriculum that I do have what you're interested in. And then
Mhm.
students can kind of flourish in that. But I think as students often find they're not given a lot of choice and they're not given room to really spend time. You need to spend time exploring. You can't just say you have 45 minutes or you have an hour
Yeah.
or now you have all these
Yeah.
subjects and you have all this homework to do when you get home from school. So I
Yeah.
think we're on the same page. It's just kind of like slowly getting into the schools, slowly getting into families, having these conversations. You're doing amazing work by not only offering this program, but now you're getting into schools and working with families. And that's like, I think slowly but surely things start to like, turn the
Yeah.
page a little bit. And that's
Yeah.
kind of like what I'm doing with this podcast. And like, I'm shifting also in my career from moving to a traditional model to a alternative model and an online school. And it's like little by little, I think it will change things. I don't think that's going to be
Yeah.
this huge wave of the shift crashes or the system crashes, and then we have the shift to a whole new system. I don't think that's what's
Yeah.
going to happen.
Yeah.
But anything else you want to share about your program, the future of your program, ideas that you have for the education system? Anything else?
Yeah, just kind of the last thing I wanted to touch on was just I think if we were to promote reform in the education system, I think it really begins with trust. And I
Mm,
think we need to go back to trust. And I think that starts with educators and administrators trusting that students want to learn and being able to allow that to happen more naturally. And then also just having children trust themselves to
mm,
make those decisions. And I think as soon as we start to bring more trust into the system, that learning will happen, that things can be learned in different ways, then we will kind of start to see that openness
yeah.
start to happen. So I really think trust is at the backbone of reform, and I hope to promote that more and more as I go into schools and into the school systems. In terms of what's coming up for KSK, so I'm always still doing virtual and I'm always still doing my in class, which is here in St. John, Canada. So that's a much smaller bracket of people who have that ability, but virtual is open to everywhere. I always do my terms from September to June, the same as the school schedule. And then I also have a children's book series coming out soon. It will
Mm.
be out in spring 2025. I wrote a series of books about a snail. His name is Hubert. His shell changes its hue based on how he's feeling.
Oh, I love
So
that.
he is this little emotional character and he supports his bugs. And I actually wrote these books for my program and I've been using in my program for over 7 years now. And it's just been like the book I wished existed to walk my children through these 5 pillars. So it's
Yeah.
kind of this like way of exploring the 5 pillars without being so direct and in your face about it. So Hubert goes through different types of these 5 pillars and things in
Yeah.
each book and each story and kind of processes a feeling in a different way every time and just kind of showing children what's possible. So I'm really
Mhm.
excited for that to start coming out as well. And I'm also working on that project with my daughter. So we're co-illustrating
Oh,
it and we've worked
wow.
on the stories together. So it's just been really fun.
Oh, that's brilliant. I love that. I didn't know that. I love the symbolism of the snail. And they always
Yeah.
say like the snail shell, like when you're ready to move out of your old snail shell into like the new one. But I like the
Yeah.
colors and emotions too. That's going to be wonderful. Thank you so much, Krista, for coming on the show. And just if you want to share with our listeners where we could find you, where's the best place, then I will link all of your links in the show notes.
Awesome. Okay, so my website is kindspiritkids.com or .ca. We have both. And then also my Instagram is kind of where everything up to date is happening. So that's at kind.spirit.kids for Instagram. So yeah.
Great. Thank you. Well, we're going to be
Thank
looking
you so
forward
much for
to,
having me.
yeah. I feel very, connected into what we're talking about in our goals for education, but I am so excited for your book series. So look out for that, everyone, in like the coming year, and we'll link all of your information in the show notes. So definitely look for Krista and Kind Spirit Kids, and she has virtual programming. So anywhere you are in the world, you can link up with her and see if there's some services for your children. Thank you so
Thank
much. It's been
you.
an
Thank
honor.
you.
Have a great day.
Bye.
Thank you for tuning into The Teacher Story. Your support fuels my mission to shape a brighter future for our children. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing, liking, and leaving a review. You can also support me by donating to my Buy Me a Coffee fund, linked in the show notes. Don't forget to explore my guests' work and show them your support. Together, we can make a difference in education. We do this in community. We rise together.